Hi. The podcast posted to this channel is intended to discuss ideas, mainly philosophy and politics, along with all their implications. I'll also discuss other podcasts and public thinkers, especially where I disagree, or where two or more thinkers disagree with each other. I will eventually bring others onto the podcast to have long-form discussions. Of course, listeners may view some of these ideas and discussions as highly contentious. I would formally introduce myself, but given the sometimes toxic response to public thinking recently, a full introduction could prove perilous. This stance reinforces the views regarding free speech and public discourse by those in the newly coined intellectual dark web. That's why, for now, I'll simply tell you that my name is Matt. I have what I feel are insightful answers to many of the open questions being pondered today. I don't think I've heard my views exactly stated by other philosophers, and rather than maintain my silence, I've decided to wade into these debates. The first 5 podcasts will be Epistemology, this podcast, followed by Free Will, Morality, Law and Government, and Economics. Given the novelty of many of my positions, I hope that the feedback by that point will be sufficient to have an Ask Me Anything podcast as number 6. For those who contribute on Patreon. I may then start to bring others into the discussion on later podcasts. Please donate if you think that this content makes you think. That's patreon.com/Taoism, Taoism channel. My outlook is essentially that of philosophical Taoism, with influence from other philosophers of the Axial Age, roughly 800 to 200 BCE, such as Epicurus. I also listen to podcasts by current thinkers such as Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, and the rest of the intellectual dark web. If we count the Renaissance as a second axial age, then perhaps we're living in the early years of a third axial age. That's up to us. The first topic I'll discuss is epistemology. This is the study of knowledge and how it relates to truth, belief, and justification. The Tao has much to say about knowledge, but since it's intentionally nebulous and as much about governance as about the individual, it can require a long time to truly understand the depth of wisdom it points to. This is often because each statement may have more than one philosophical implication. For instance, the Tao says, "Those who know are not learned. Those who are learned do not know." This seemingly oversimplified statement appears to be talking about the misguided paths that those with knowledge may take, or take you along with them. I think the depth of this statement goes beyond that, though. What it implies is that what is true does not come from learning, per se, but from your senses in the real world. That implication demands an objective material universe we can all experience. Jordan Peterson stated that what is true is nested in us. So how can the world tell us what is true? To illustrate, he asked us to imagine approaching a field. He said, "The field doesn't tell us how to cross it." Yes, it does. While you may have a destination that points your way in a general sense, perhaps there are low marshy areas in the field. I think you see the implication. The field can guide us, even as we guide ourselves. We'll return to this thinking in a moment. Let's look at the standard model of knowledge that can be shown as a Venn diagram, with truth and belief as 2 overlapping circles. Knowledge can be viewed as a circle in the region where truth and belief overlap. To know something, philosophers have traditionally held that there must be justification. Knowledge has therefore been defined by philosophy as justified true belief. Edmund Gettier saw a problem with that definition. Gettier-type problems are almost invariably wrong, but they do point out that there is a need to redefine knowledge in philosophy. Where philosophical definitions appear to contradict reality, just know that reality wins every time. Let's explore some of these problems before I correct the traditional model of epistemology to account for Gettier-type problems. In Gettier's first case, the first example that Gettier comes up with has to do with 2 men, Jones and Smith, applying for the same job. They're both waiting to interview. Let's say Smith had strong evidence that Jones will get the job. For example, the boss said Jones will get the job, and also that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. For example, Smith saw Jones take the coins out of his pocket and count them. Gettier makes a specific statement. Jones is the man who will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. And from that concludes the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. By coincidence, both men have 10 coins in their pocket, and it turns out Smith is the one who was offered the job. So the question is, did Smith know he was going to get the job? Another example is The Sheep in the Field by Chisholm. Imagine that you're standing outside a field. You see within it what looks exactly like a sheep. What belief instantly occurs to you? Among the many beliefs that you could have, it happens to be the belief that there is a sheep standing in the field. And in fact, you're right, because there is a sheep behind the hill in the middle of the field. You cannot see that sheep, though, and you have no direct evidence of its existence. Moreover, what you're seeing is a dog disguised as a sheep. Hence, you have a well-justified true belief that there is a sheep in the field. But is that belief knowledge? Another example is The Fake Barns by Goldman. Henry is driving in the countryside looking at objects in fields. He sees what looks exactly like a barn. Accordingly, he thinks that he is seeing a barn. Now, that is indeed what he's doing, but what he does not realize is that the neighborhood contains many fake barns. Let's call it Fake Barn County. So these are mere barn facades that look like real barns when viewed from the road. And if he had been looking at one of them, he would have been deceived into believing that he was seeing a barn. Luckily, he wasn't doing this, as the barn he saw was real. Consequently, his belief is justified and true, but is it knowledge? Now let's look at some other epistemological problems. The broken clock stuck at 3 o'clock. Walking by it at 3 o'clock would lead you to believe that it is 3, which it is, but the unstated proposition is that the clock is working. We all know a broken clock is right twice a day. You have a justified true belief, but did you know it was 3 o'clock? Or the oasis scenario. You're wandering through the desert and find a valley where you can see a rock far below. You imagine finding water under that rock. If you do find a small spring under the rock, it would seem to be based on justified true belief. But did you know there was water under the rock? Or the epistemic regress problem, which is essentially a kid asking why over and over. So this assumes a straight line or even a web of causation, either one reason begetting another or interrelated mutually enforcing causes. In reality, each reason is not as tied to the one before or after as strongly as you might assume. Each answer must stand on its own. Reasons given to children while answering a string of whys might be based to differing degrees on belief or even knowledge. Where each one stands is different. Each answer may provide clues as to which buckets some of the other answers should fall, but not necessarily. For instance, of 8 regressive whys, all may be true except the 7th. So there are 2 issues. Is each individual answer correct, and is the overall string correct? Similarly, we have the preface paradox, admitting in the preface of a book you're writing that some facts will inevitably be wrong. There are some beliefs that we must admit a probabilistic reasoning for, and some truths that are closed. Combining probabilistic reasoning and simple logic is often necessary. A lengthy statement including many distinct ideas might have some chance of containing a single falsehood. A well-researched and well-crafted chain statement might not turn out to be completely false, but directionally, the incorrect idea might be the linchpin. It could negate the larger statement. Now let's look at my definition of knowledge. I propose that we change the definition of knowledge from justified true belief to verified true belief. The problem with the word justified is that although its meaning denotes incremental case building, it can be taken as a leading indicator. In other words, what exactly are you justified in believing before any verification of the truth? This is a little tongue-in-cheek, but How would you know something before you truly know it? Things that are purely subjective or purely abstract, sure, you think. You may think that purely subjective topics would be safe, such as your favorite color. If someone asks your favorite color and you blurt out red because it always was, but upon deeper reflection decide it's really now purple, then you can see the problem. You were justified in answering with a favorite color, but it turned out that you needed to verify even that, thus changing the answer. Now you know your favorite color is purple. Imagine again a passenger in your car telling you that you're in fake barn county, with you saying that you know you saw a barn. Did you get out and check? If you get out and check and it's a barn by any possible measure of a barn, then you can say you know it's a barn. Now, if someone later tells you on that on some strange technicality combined with some extreme illusions, it wasn't truly a barn you verified, then the question I anticipate is, did you really know that it was a barn? No, because knowledge is subjectively held, but objectively verifiable. Later verification simply knocked your supposed knowledge back to a belief, and apparently a false one. So if you say you know something, but you're wrong, someone who does know can tell you that you simply believe you have knowledge, because the objective truth contradicts you. Knowledge is actually a lagging indicator. Once your belief is verified as true, then it's knowledge. It's knowledge as long as it remains verified. I placed a few points, A, B, C, and D, on my diagram to illustrate additional detail. A is clearly knowledge, perhaps recently attained. Both B and C are beliefs at the border of truth. B will turn out to be true once verified, but C will always be merely a belief. D is a truth, let's say science beyond what has been discovered to date. Now, let's think about truth. I'm going to discuss the first exchange between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. And this was on the Waking Up podcast number 62. This is actually a great example of a discussion regarding epistemology, or more accurately, what is true. Now, they may not have felt that way at the time, but I disagree. Jordan's self-described viewpoint was one of Darwinism, while he ascribed a Newtonian claim to Sam of being deterministic, materialist, objectivist, rationalist. So one of Jordan's core premises in this discussion was that something is true if it's true enough to survive and reproduce, partly resting on a phrase from Nietzsche that if it doesn't serve life, it's not true. Now, changing a single word in Nietzsche's phrase solves that dilemma, by the way. So changing the word true to right, since right can both take on a moral flavor and also mean correct. Words matter, as we saw with knowledge. Sam's contention that Jordan cannot conflate the word truth with any other ideas, such as wisdom, is definitely correct. The word truth, if no other word, must stay discrete in its definition. When viewing my Venn diagram, truth is something that can itself be revised and appended, as in science. This continued verification of objective reality is part of the process and necessary to knowledge. Remember, knowledge is subjectively held, but objectively verifiable. Also, notice in the Venn diagram that there is more territory in unverified true belief than in knowledge. As the Tao Te Ching says, knowing that you do not know is true knowledge. Presuming to know is a disease. This implies the care that must be taken at the margins of truth, belief, and knowledge. I'll discuss and dispute one of Jordan's other claims that truth is nested in morality in a later podcast about morality. Let's go down the path that Jordan proposes, however, and see why mankind might be hardwired the way that he describes and how that plays out in practice. A good, if extreme, example might be a cult. To survive and thrive in a cult, you usually need to take on its ideology, completely. Let's say the ideology might demand human sacrifice of those not sufficiently loyal. It behooves the adherents to stick very close to the script, so as not to trigger their own sacrifice. The beliefs themselves may objectively be awful, but it is irrelevant in a Darwinian sense, just as Jordan asserts. Let's say cult members mostly survive and their population increases. According to Peterson, this would mean that if we are wired to survive, adapt, and reproduce given a very wide set of environments, achieving those ends is the only truth. But this is only true if viewed from one frame, that of the individual versus their Darwinian survival and the possibility of reproduction. This is undoubtedly why our views have evolved to be so plastic and elastic. However, for true enough, when viewed externally and from a different frame, such as natural law or some similar attempt at objective morality, there may be reasons to view the cult with suspicion. Perhaps they start seeking human sacrifices outside the cult, either when no internal transgressions are committed but the regularity of ritual needs to be maintained, or perhaps to prevent cult population reduction in excess. Those in neighboring communities being preyed upon would inevitably feel that the cult is dangerous, unfair, and cruel. The law of reciprocity is hardwired into us as well. How does the law of reciprocity fare when it meets a true enough belief system? Is there such a thing as too far, and is that foreseeable within some objective framework? We should all understand the outcome of punching everyone we meet in the face. On a long enough timeline, the result would be to get punched ourselves, and perhaps the others we had punched previously would set upon us as well. This is the asymmetric kind of retaliation we sometimes seek when we feel or know that we've been wronged. Those who are strong, in fact, are often the ones who double down and end up facing repercussions. Let's use a real-world example. Hernan Cortés led the invasion of Mexico. There were numerous battles fought along the way between Spanish conquistadors and native republics such as Tlaxcala. The number of human sacrifices by the Aztec had necessitated a steady supply of victims, so the Aztec Empire kept up a state of perpetual war with Tlaxcala. Cortés, who went on with his native allies to conquer the Mexica, put the resentment of the Tlaxcalans to good use. The Aztec Empire fell, in large part due to the people it had hurt. So although the Aztec Empire and many of its citizens had thrived, multiplied, and were prosperous, this Petersonian definition of true enough seemed unable to withstand the widespread resentment and subsequent retaliation caused by its own objective transgressions. In other words, the law of reciprocity seems to have won that clash. This implies other factors when considering what is true enough, even from the point of evolutionary biology. The issue with metaphorical truth is that it may provide a temporary or situational increase in success for the individual, but with occasional yet predictable catastrophic outcomes for this individual or the society. Simply trying to understand the archetypes and metaphorical truth from an evolutionary perspective means that we are doomed to see no further than man ever has. We'll only gain a better understanding of why we are the way we are. Without ever seeing what is truer than true enough, the same mistakes will perpetuate on other worlds. Referring back to Peterson's crossing the field analogy, we need to understand how the field rebuts our goals, allowing for the synthesis of subjective and objective truth. This, of course, foreshadows the morality podcast ahead. This concludes the first podcast of the Taoism channel. I hope you continue to follow and choose to engage. Donate on Patreon for the chance to drive the discussion, have your questions answered, and suggest future posts. The Patreon link is included in the description. Thank you for your support.